Okay, I don't have my magazine cover, but this is Desert Fox here, which is primarily what I'm going to be explaining during this video. But I've also got the Trail of the Fox set up here, and yes, this is the best argument for modular tables that I have. You know, if I didn't have this big sucker set up in here anyhow, I could have gotten by with a lot less table. Maybe one more long wise, I don't know. There's definitely kind of a stretch. Now, if you take a quick look at the Desert Fox map, it's actually a fairly small map, but it takes up a lot of room because it's so long. It is a little longer than these, whatever the hell they are that I got off IKEA, but would fit on most people's, reasonable sized gaming tables. Putting the mixture together, or even just doing Trail of the Fox, is a little bit more painful because of the odd shape. This takes a fairly large table, and between the two of them, they obviously wouldn't fit on the big table even. Okay. So, well, obviously this is covering... Desert Fox covers most of the same terrain or scope that Africa does. I played a while back. Got it up there. Or DAC. I don't know. DAC may actually cover more. I'm not sure. Desert Fox does not handle the initial Italian invasion across the board. But otherwise, they're very similar scoped games. And they also have some similarities. You could probably guess that Africa is somewhat derivative of it. And in fact, the OCS, I think, is very derivative. And you'll maybe see why when I look through the rules. There are definite differences. OCS, for example, I think the supply rules work a little bit more cleanly than they do in Desert Fox. At least in terms of actually handling the mechanics of them as opposed to the difficulty of them. But we'll get into that in a moment. Your units have a number of values on them. Let's take a quick look at a combat unit. You have a setup instructions here, where that LS is. You of course have designation here. The parenthesized number indicates the level of the armor. That's handled for certain upgrades that are allowed later in the game. Basically, there are going to be pieces you can upgrade the armor to, so these guys have higher numbers on them. They're level 3, I think, all of them. Axis only goes to level 2. Let's see what else. LS indicates Libyan map start, and we have a similar system over on the Trail of the Fox. The little number here. Okay, also, this might be a number, and if it's a number, it's indicating the number that the reinforcement comes in for the first time. Reinforcements in Desert Fox are a little weird. We'll get to that in a moment. Let me talk about it, actually. For the Commonwealth especially, you'll see there's all these withdrawals. And units that withdraw go into these boxes sometimes, and that'll indicate that they might come back in. And I think I penciled in the turn that they come back in, but I didn't do it there for some reason. I don't know if that's the case. All right, let's look what else. We have your normal NATO symbols to indicate what you've got there. That's, of course, an armored unit. Okay. First number here is the combat strength. Last number is its movement point allowance, and you can see very high movement point allowances, and they're higher than that because this actually has a dual movement phase. So basically, you can shoot across the map pretty far with 56 movement points, which is what you can have in a turn, basically. And then the center number is the morale rating, which is important for combat and for some other factors. You have a bunch of tables here covering the rules for supply to some extent, rules for Malta, a little Malta track there, which affects the convoy table there. You've got, well, like I said, your little withdrawal space here. There's reinforcements here. Reinforcements are also here for the Axis. Unfortunately, that's covered up by part of the Trail of the Fox map. The two games were released in different issues in the magazine. The Trail came out in the TSR days, but I think it had been deeply developed because, for example, the map manages to look somewhat similar. Not entirely. The counters, unfortunately, for Trail are these weird glossy things, and I really butchered the hell out of them when clipping them, but they were actually very hard to cut, and they were more annoying unclipped. That era was very bad for glossy counters. The SPI's old counters, these all came out very, very nicely, and were very easy to clip. On the board itself, you have little stars. Those indicate victory point spaces. That's important for the Desert Fox game itself if you're playing the campaign game, which we're playing more than that. You have this weird combat result table, which is going to be divided into different terrain types. This is kind of like OCS, with different odds over it. But it works a little differently. Actually, it may work the same. It may have the similar system to it, where you roll it, you find an initial column. You're going to make shifts on that column, and then you roll a die and add that, and that's going to be the results that you get. And you're going to have an effect on the attacker and an effect based on morale on the defender's units. Some information on the terrain effects, both for hexes as well as for hex sides. You got the sequence of play here. These refit boxes, when units get destroyed, they go in there in general, which means you're allowed to rebuild them and you'll be getting replacement points. The refit chart, which indicates the cost of all refits there. A couple of tracks to handle keeping track of your refit points for the different factions in the game, and for keeping track of air points. And then the turn track. The turn track's fairly complicated. You have a number of refit points that each player gets each turn. You've got the German ones here and the Italian. You have air point assignment. The Allies, or the Commonwealth, get a certain number of mobile supply units each turn. And then you have a maximum armor rating, which reflects that number up here in parentheses, remember. Okay. Some of the terrain's quite harsh. In particular, these sand seas are basically impassable to motorized units, as are the escarpments. I'm sorry, those are ridges. Escarpments are these little guys here. The escarpments are basically prohibited to motorized, and very high movement point cost to non-motorized, and they also, zones of control don't go over. But zones of control do go over ridges, which means this is a good place for a fort, which is something I was not certain about a moment ago, or all day. I thought I'd have to change that and then forgot to look it up. You got oases, which have temporary supply value, or partial supply value. They also have their own values there. You have wadis, which provide a movement point penalty and a combat effect. The wadis, they don't change due to the season. And some desert games will treat the wadis as a different factor depending on whether or not there's going to be water in them. Remember, they're kind of well, maybe not remember, but they're kind of temporary rivers and streams. Okay. My X, that looks like my writing. I wrote out the sequence of play here. So the first thing you do in a turn, I didn't note this, is you're going to check for initiative. And that's going to be based on this die roll span here. I believe the Axis get it if it's within that span. We could... Yeah, it just keeps getting worse and worse. The other thing that's listed there is who has reinforcements. So Commonwealth and Italians are going to get reinforcements that turn. That's a little modified because, as you can see, there's some strange counters here. Those are from Trail of the Fox. They're part of the The two games kind of overlap a little bit in time. Trail of the Fox actually starts in November, and this has 2 turns, November and December of 42. So you're covering the possibility that the Germans don't get pushed back quite as quickly as they do. In fact, in Desert Fox, the Germans would have lost the game. Now, victory conditions are kind of a weird situation. Playing just Desert Fox, you're going to be playing to have a certain number of victory points for the Germans by the end of the game, assuming that no automatic victory happens. That doesn't matter if you're playing with Trail of the Fox. If you're playing with Trail of the Fox, you have to have a certain number of victory points on the Trail of the Fox end of the game. And that kind of screws the game up in the sense that it's not clear what you want to sort of declare that interim victory for. Because the truth of the matter is the Germans might well be able to do better in the Desert Fox game and win it by its victory conditions, yet put themselves in a worse position for Trail of the Fox. And on the other hand, they might not want to push as hard in Desert Fox as they would in Trail of the Fox. So what I'm going to kind of do is I'm going to assess victory at some point in Desert Fox. I'm not quite sure where, probably close to where the historical period was, but if you fall back early by your own choice, as Rommel actually did, that's not necessarily saying anything about about how well you did in this game. So, to some extent, I'm not really playing for victory. But if you play just to win Trail of the Fox, you may not expend as much effort on the Desert Fox map. Because, to tell you the truth, although Alexandria can be captured in this, unlike, say, in Africa, where there's really absolutely no chance of doing it, the Brits can haul themselves up in the swamps around Alexandria and prevent any possible attack on them, as happened in the game that I played. It's very, very unlikely that they'll get that far. They're going to probably be stopped around El Alamein, as they were historically. In Africa, I find that very difficult to do, actually. I find that the Germans have an easier time getting really close to Alexandria, but they still can't take it because the terrain in the game makes it impossible. Well, in this game, if you crack El Alamein, and I've seen it happen without them getting there, but you have a pretty fair chance of making it further towards Alexandria. There's nothing on the board that says you're not going to make it. These marshes are painful. I don't remember all the rules about them, but we'll look them up. But they do make it more difficult, but it's not an absolute impossibility. The Brits can't just throw a couple of units down. Most of the units here are going to be regimental size. The Italians, though, have some mighty divisions on the board. I think they got one here, which are very, very painful because they count as 3 units but don't have a lot of strength, or three stacking points. This is about the same strength as this 1 stacking point infantry. And stacking points are important towards supply. All right. Well, so what you do is you roll the initiative span and see if the Axis has the initiative. And if they do, they'll be the first player. If they don't, actually, it may be a choice matter. I believe it's a choice matter. The person who... if the Axis gets the initiative, they get to choose who goes first. On the first turn, though, the Axis automatically goes first, and on the second turn, they automatically have initiative, and they get to choose who goes first, and it's probably that they're going to want them. Okay. The next thing you do is a reinforcements phase. This is pretty simple for the most part. You're going to just be pulling the units off the stack, and they either go in near Alexandria, I think it's within 2 hexes, or near El Agila, which is the primary, not on this map. On the map underneath, there's a supply source there. Those are both full out supply sources. They will supply their side. And in fact, unlike in Africa, Bardia and Tobruk are also full-out supply sources for the Allies. You don't have to worry about shipping supplies into them in the same way. This game deals a lot less with the naval aspect of supplies in the game and the ports and all that. That's not covered here. So there are some slight little neat things in Africa that aren't in here. Also during the reinforcement phase, if it's the Axis player turn, they roll on this convoy table, and there are going to be modifiers for there based on the turn number as well as how many points are over in Malta. That'll depress the number of Axis supply points that come in. And supply points are going to come in as these MSUs, which can be converted over to supply dumps during your refit phase. Then you're allowed to allocate air points. Now, air points are marked here on the turn track, but they're a cumulative thing. So if you have an air point for one turn, if you get an air point on turn one, as the Axis has, you have that air point until you lose it. But that just indicates the capacity that you can use once per turn. One of the things you can do with it, if you're the Allies, you can ship it off to Malta to help interdict German transport or Axis transport of supplies. The only thing you're going to interdict is supplies here. The other thing that the Axis can choose to bomb Malta, and that uses this raid on Malta table. And I'll perhaps explain that a little later. Well, I might as well explain it now. So you choose how many air points you're going to send. You have to expend that many supply. I think it's got to be, I don't know if it's dumps or MSUs. It doesn't really matter. How many supply units you have to expend. And those supply units can't be close to the front line. If they're within 5 hexes of an enemy unit, you can't choose them. And then you roll a die and see how many air points each person loses. And obviously, if you're attacking on the one table, well, you've got kind of even odds. But as you go further and further up, you're going to do more and more damage to the Brits, and you're going to be able to hit their air points at higher rates than the ones you committed there. I have a moves magazine that has some expansion, some sort of optional rules to add to the game. One of them allows for a possibility of an invasion of Malta. One of them allows for the addition of a Rommel unit, which I never wrote, so I don't think I ever played it. And one of them is going to use these little long-range desert recon units here, desert patrols. The desert patrols are kind of an interesting little piece because they're able to operate out of supply and kind of screw with the opponent's supply lines a little better than the regular recon are. They give a little bit more depth to the desert raiding game. The Rommel counter gives a military bonus to Rommel, and he gets called off the map, I think very similar to Africa has a Rommel counter as well. And the attack on Malta requires that you use some air power. You have to either use your German paratroopers or the Folgore glider infantry in order to make the attack. And none of them really added much to the game, in my opinion. And I don't think I have it kicking around here, so I'm not going to be playing with that. I probably could find it online, but I think I only have it at home. The next thing you're going to do is movement. Now, movement's fairly standard in this game. You pay your movement point cost based on the terrain chart. Zones of control are a little weird, and there's some special rules to movement. So zones of control, not all units have a zone of control, first of all. Let's take a quick look at them. Okay. It's got to be a combat unit with an unparenthesized strength that's not disrupted and that's in supply, and it has to have a stacking point. The zone in control goes through anything except escarpments, They never go into cities, but they come out from cities. They can't go through prohibited terrain to the unit. Pure armor zones of control don't go into mountain hexes. There aren't a lot of mountain hexes here on the Desert Fox map. They're over here. I think that's it. But there are a few more up here in Tunisia and Algeria. And what they're going to do is when you enter it, you have to stop, and you can move no further unless you can infiltrate or overrun. Costs you an extra movement point to enter. If you begin in a zone of control, you can't move directly from one to the other unless you're allowed to infiltrate. I assume you can do it with overrun too. Infiltration is if a zone of control is only exerted by one stacking point of a non-motorized unit. Then I believe motorized units can move through them, just paying the extra zone of control. Overrun's a little different. You need 10 to 1 odds. And here's the interesting thing. If the unit's capable of reacting, it may get a reaction move as you're in the process of overrunning it. It may be able to take its reaction move during your movement. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, then after you do movement, the enemy's allowed to react. And basically, he's allowed to move a quarter of his movement point allowance. In the first reaction phase, all of his units can react. In the second reaction phase, only his motorized units can react. Now, reaction has a further restriction, which is... avoiding overrun has a further restriction, which is... I think you can't do it if the unit overrunning you is faster. Seem to remember that. I don't see it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that during an... Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that if a unit has... If an attacking unit has a greater movement point allowance than the units that are trying to react, those units cannot react. You could react with some faster units, but the others couldn't. Okay. Then you go to the combat phase, and combat's weird in this game. God. My first thought was, oh my God, whoa. And then very quickly I got very excited about it. And since then, I've seen other games that use this system, which is basically, as I said, you look at the terrain type that the defend... Oh, you must attack, by the way, if you're in an enemy zone of control, which is why being in a city is important, because you don't have... The zones of control don't extend into the city. They do extend into fortifications, though, which can end up digging you out of fortifications that are outside the city very easily. And that fortification, which should only be level 1, becomes a pain in the butt for the English to get out of if they get trapped in Tobruk. But overall, they want it there. So you compare the type of terrain, and fortification is a type of terrain, unless you're in a better type of terrain. Oh, no point to put it in the rough. Let's put it there. The rough terrain is the same as the fortification. No reason to put them there. Okay. So you cross-reference that to the odds, attacker versus defender, and you're allowed to look at the opponent's stacks in this, which can make things really annoying because there's a lot of units with weird numbers in it, and stacking is quite large. I haven't gone into that, but it's 6 stacking points in a hex and up to 9 in a city hex. And most of the units have 1 stacking point. Some of them have 0. Some of them, like these damn Italian divisions, have 3. No breakdown rules like in Africa, which is kind of a shame. Those were kind of cool. You find your odds, and that's going to be your base level, base column for attack. From that, you get column shifts. So first the attacker, then the defender gets to announce support units. Support units include air points that they can commit to the attack, and they include artillery units that get put in. And combined arms also gives a bonus in this game. And those are all going to be expressed as combat shifts on the column. If your starting column is, if your starting odds are less than what would get you to column 1, you can't attack. If you do attack, you suffer immediately, I believe, a D4D result. You see this D6D, it would be the same except with a 4. I'll explain what those results mean in a little bit. But that's a pretty bad result. And it doesn't count for any soak-off. Which means if other units, you can't make a viable attack with other units unless you've gotten at least to the worst level on the chart. If you go to the top level of the chart somehow, or the top level up here out for a given terrain as your starting point for the chart, that's as far as you go. And in fact, if somehow shifts or something drop you below the bottom level, you end up on the 1 chart anyway to begin with. Then you roll a die. And the die is added to the column number. And then the result is going to be read off based on the morale of the defender, or just the attacker takes that result. And the results come in a number of values. The numeral is a retreat result. That's how many hexes you have to retreat. The D is the small d is a disrupted. The big D is a depleted, which would mean all units take a step loss, essentially. And most units in this game are going to have 2 steps on them. You flip them over, and that's what they have. Some may have no step on the back. I'm not sure. And then a P is a partial depletion, which if you've accumulated any Ps in your combat, after all the results have been taken for the combat, 1 unit selected by your opponent takes an additional depletion result. If you end up getting destroyed through whatever means while you're out of supply, supply is a big deal in this game, so we'll get to that in a moment. You don't necessarily go back to the refit box. You make a roll. If your unit is a 1 morale unit, you're allowed a better roll than if it's not. Motorized units, I think, are the only ones that get out of that get that chance to get out. If you don't have a motorized unit, I think you're destroyed forever, no matter what. I may be wrong about that. Okay, what about supply? Supply is what this game really kind of brought forward, is a really detailed supply system. Now, I don't know what Campaign for North Africa's supply system was, but I like to think that this is a much, much streamlined version, and it's very close to the kind of flavor, at least, that the OCS provides in supply. And in fact, in some ways, Africa in the original version did. I understand that this second edition kind of abstracts it away further. So the way supply works is that you have a range that you can draw, and I believe it's 12 hexes, or 12 movement points to a dump, or 5 movement points to, well, a little truck, but the little truck has to trace back to something else. Now, the dumps can trace back to other dumps, or they can just use a network of trucks. The dumps, of course, give you a better range, which is one reason. And if you can trace all the way back to your supply source, whichever one you've got, that's kind of cool, right? But here's the thing. You have a limitation to how many stacking points can trace supply through any given supply element. Now, it depends on when you're tracing supply. At the beginning of your turn, you determine supply for all your units. And at that point, you're allowed to trace up to 10 stacking points of motorized units for general supply to any dump or through an MSU. But if you trace more than 5 to a dump or through an MSU, you lose it. Now, there's a restriction to that, which is you can only lose 2 MSUs in any given turn. You can lose as many dumps as you like. So supplying your units becomes a potential pain in the butt, where the more units you have, kind of, what you don't want just a single long supply line. You need to provide some depth to your supply line, multiple, almost a web of supply, so that you can trace through multiple different units with your combat units. And again, you're trying to trace back to an original supply source. I don't know if Tobruk eventually becomes a... Let's take a look at supply sources here. Bardia is unlimited to Commonwealth within 12 movement points if it's occupied by a strength point, and it cannot be extended. Alexandria and Tobruk are permanent for the Commonwealth, and Elagila is permanent for the Axis. Yeah, that's how I thought. The other thing that can be used to trace supply to is the rail line, which is not yet completed. You know, this little railhead. What you're going to be doing during the Allied Commonwealth turn is you can put a truck in front of the rail line, and then the rail line gets extended to the next hex forward. And they can do that once each movement phase, so they can actually extend the rail line 4 hexes per turn. Yeah, except there's Axis units that are going to be interfering with the building of that rail line. But you do want to get it extended as far as possible early in the game, because when you come back on the attack, it'll be helpful again then. And maybe you can get it all the way to Tobruk. That's as far as it goes, and you're not allowed to extend it, and probably don't need to in the Race for Tunisia game. Chances are you're going to be fighting way up there, not anywhere in the range of that supply. Okay. There's also combat supply. Combat supply is a little different. No more than 5 stacking points can trace combat supply to a friendly dump. And if more than 3 attacking... Oh, that's attacking strength points. Defensive, you can trace any number to a dump. If more than 3 attacking or 6 defending stacking points trace combat supply to a dump or through an MSU, it's eaten. Painful. And is that got a limitation on it? Yes, that also has a limitation. During the combat phase, you'd only lose no more than 2 trucks for that. But again, as many dumps as you need to trace through. So you can see, you can field a bigger army, and you'll have to excuse me, I'm trying to plug in here. You can field a bigger army than is engaged in combat, given the supply limitations. Whether or not you want to eat... I'm not actually plugged in. Whether or not you want to actually eat the supplies, the supply depot itself. If you eat the supply depot itself, well, you know, you still get a higher cost in total depots used when you're doing combat supply. Okay. The effects, well, if you're out of supply during your refit phase, if you've not been able to fix your supply issue, then there's a chance your unit will just start depleting. And remember, depletion's a step loss. If you're out of supply during combat, your strength for attacking units will be halved. Okay. If a defending unit can't trace supply, its combat strength is halved, rounded down, and its morale rating gets a 1 added to it. Attacking units will also have their strength halved if they're out of combat supply, and they suffer an automatic disruption in addition to any other results. Now, if you take a disruption on already disrupted units, so for example, if you pick a disruption up during the combat, that counts as a depletion instead for the units. So that's kind of a pain in the ass. Some special rules on emergency supply. A morale 1 unit is allowed to eat a dump before its movement. I never used this rule, and it got left out of Trail of the Fox. And you get this little, not that. You get this little emergency supply marker. which indicates that unit will be in supply for the entirety of its movement, for the rest of its turn, basically. Any combats, any movement, whatever, it counts as if it's in supply. That's a little, it's an expensive use, so you'd better have some particularly good use for that unit being in supply. I left some things out of combat, of course. So, for example, every armor unit you have in the game, in a battle, has to be matched with an infantry unit, or else it's only half strength. I think that's the effect of combined arms in this. I don't think there's an advantage to it. Some games give you an advantage for combined arms. This one gives you the assumption that you're going to use combined arms, and if you fail to do it, every stacking point of the unit has to be there. I left flak units out of play. I didn't explain flak units. The Germans have the 88s, and they have them as specific flak units. Let's see, I got one right here. What they're going to do is when they're attacking, they subtract 2 off the defending armor strength points that they're facing, if they're facing armor. And if they're defending, they subtract 4 off the attacker's armor. So they're kind of a useful thing there. To upgrade armor, you have to have it in the refit box. You're allowed to destroy your armor in order to rebuild it. That's a high cost. Usually it's better to take it as casualties rather than just delete it there. Fortifications, I think we have one on the board there, and we have some over here on the Tunisian map. Not limited by counter mix, neither are the supply units, so I'll be using counters probably from the Trail of the Fox while we're playing Desert Fox, and chances are once we get towards the end of Desert Fox, once we cross the border between the maps, I'll be removing these maps and this table because, frankly, the Germans aren't going to make their way back. Okay. The fortification gives you a different combat row on the combat effects chart over there. And it also, if you're in a level 2 fort, one non-armored unit is allowed to be doubled. Now you have 2 different kinds of movement allowance in the game. You have motorized units, which are most of these units, and then you have foot units, which have kind of a stripe on them. It's a lot more visible on the English units, or on the Commonwealth units, than it is on the Italian units. The German one, there's a couple German foot units as well. And that's about it, to tell you the truth. I don't want to go into all the details because I don't want to know them. There are some special rules here. What is variable attacks? What the hell is that shit? Okay, so there are special rules in the Trail of the Fox game, which I have not touched. I'm planning on probably going into the Trail of the Fox specific rules sometime soon before we enter that map. Essentially, the way the campaign works, the dual game campaign, is that you play Desert Fox using the Desert Fox rules, and you play Trail of the Fox using special Trail of the Fox rules. So, for example, infantry units, maybe foot units, in mountain terrain in Trail of the Fox are doubled in strength, but they're not doubled in strength on the Desert Fox thing. And whatever that variable attacks rule is, oh, Axis command rules, okay. Yeah, covering the kind of surprise effect because of the torch landings. Okay, so we'll worry about the special additional rules that we add on from Trail of the Fox. And maybe I'll remember to tell people who look on that, which I'll probably load up to the Trail of the Fox game. Hey, you know what? You want to look at the base rules? They're pretty much covered in Desert Fox. One exception to that is the emergency supply rule is not covered in Trail of the Fox, but they decided to make that rule a special case. You decide before the campaign whether or not you're going to play with it, and it applies to both maps. I'm going to play with it, but I never use it, so unless I see some great reason to, it probably won't get used. Victory conditions for this sucker. There's a short game, the Race for Tobruk game, which takes, I don't know what it takes, 5 turns, which is playable in an evening. And there the German goal is to get Tobruk in that time period. And if they can't get that, they need Bardia and Sidi Barani under their control. I've usually found that it's possible to get these. In fact, in the campaign game, I usually get these, but not Tobruk. And in fact, sometimes I never get Tobruk, which is painful as hell. All right. And let's see if we can find the North Africa campaign victory conditions here. The Axis player wins if he takes Alexandria. Non-parenthesized combat strength unit. I think it may have to be in supply. At the beginning of a Commonwealth refit phase or at the end of the game. Otherwise, you add up the victory points and the Axis. These are all for the Axis. And the Axis has to have at least 20 to get a marginal victory. If I'm in a position where I know I could defend better late in the game and say I'm holding up here, but I feel like I need to get back there for the Race for Tobruk victory, I'll worry about that then. What is that victory? The victory conditions for that are the Allied player has to take Tripoli. Otherwise, you use Trail of the Fox victory conditions, which are the turn the last entry port is captured. We got weird things here, like little airplanes. There's like airfields, and I don't know what the entry ports are. If I unplug, I have enough juice to finish this up briefly. Let's take a look at specs. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what the entry ports are. The letter? That can't be it. Entry port. Cost. Okay, so it's the parenthesized numbers, and Tripoli is a entry port too. The game. Let's see if the victory conditions are different. The Axis player, the Allied player automatically wins if any Allied unit with a stack component occupies Tripoli at the end of the game turn up to and including October 42. Yeah, so if you push the Axis back before the torch landings happen and you're able to somehow get Tripoli, yeah, good luck with that, okay? I think the automatic victory in either case is almost impossible. The Allies have a tough time getting, even on the offensive, they have a tough time getting out of here and through there. It's tough for both sides to get through that area. If they smash their way through here, they got to do it again here. And then they got to continue with the coastal road. It's painful. The initial setup, this is all meat. It really is. What you have on the board here, these two little stacks, they're enough to take all that out. Most of it's supply dumps. There are supply overrun special rules where you don't have to get 10 to 1 odds. You can do it automatically with 6 to 1, and you can do it with less than 6 to 1 odds with some risk of damage coming to you. You can also, there's other special first turn rules, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, there are definitely other special first turn rules. First of all, the Germans getting the the initiative on the first turn. But I seem to remember other special rules in the first turn. And I do not see them. And I don't want to spend too much more time looking that up. They may be kind of embedded in places. So like supply overrun on the first turn is a little different, I believe. And there may be some other little special factors in here that I have to deal with. But I don't want to look them up while I'm on camera here, because I just want to get this all in one video without having to go through Movie Maker. Anyway, nice long map, and this is going to be a decently long game. The original is probably a 2-dayer. Add the extra map and it takes a little longer. It's going to take me longer because of the way I like to play. You saw me play, if you watch the CWB things, you know, I played Champion Hill. That's really a 1-dayer. Perryville certainly is. And they took me several days to get through. So, you know, this is going to probably take me a couple weeks here.